keep spinning, lying in the darkness, waiting. I'm sure they're outside circling the house, creeping up, spying, waiting to steal, to loot. There's no moon. It almost ended in the field. It almost ended everywhere. Surrounded by small, smiling flowers. The flowers didn't care what I'd done, and they won't care when I'm done. The flowers hid me as I stood surrounded in the field. They made my nose itch. I spun when they hung me. I was caught, apprehended by betrayal. It was raining heavily. They tied my hands behind my back. Watching, looking at their watches, waiting for the appointed hour. They hoisted me up, asked me if I had any last words. I had words, but they were not my last. And then, a miracle. That day, I died, even though my heart kept beating. I died, and then I lived. Captain Thunderbolt. I have a birthmark around my neck to prove it.
The dead, we know, are insensible to the voice of praise or blame, to the injustice of false or the more withering rebukes of veritable history. But every act done in public by any of its members becomes an integral part of the property of the public. And society has the right, if it pleases, to a record. A stereotyped edition of it.
My name is Michael Martin, and I was born in the year of our Lord 1795. I was the idol of my father's family. My father was a Roman Catholic farmer who took particular pains to instruct his children in the precepts of Christianity. Unhappily, in the case of myself, the seed was sown in an ungrateful soil. I was remarkable at school for one thing, my inattention to study.
1818, Dr. John Wilson arrives in Dummerston, Vermont, and begins to teach the local school children.
No one knew a thing about Dr. John Wilson's background.
They only knew what they could see.
Dr. Wilson always wears a scarf around his neck.
Dr. Wilson certainly enjoys the company of ladies.
Dr. Wilson drinks.
Often?
Dr. Wilson often falls flat on his face at the town contra dance.
Dr. Wilson is clearly educated.
All things being equal, in 1818, the town agreed to employ Dr. John Wilson as their new schoolmaster. In 1818, Dr. Wilson did have one odd request.
In 1818, this odd request was that the schoolhouse be built to certain specifications.
The specifications that Dr. Wilson asked for.
In this rather odd request
Was that the schoolhouse be built in the shape of a circle.
The whole building was to be built in the shape of a circle.
From the ground up.
Circa 1818.
Imagine a circle.
From the ground up.
With windows all around 1818.
The townspeople could.
And so they agreed. And they built Dr. John Wilson the Circular Schoolhouse.
Or, depending on who you ask, the round school. The round school.
Or the Circular Schoolhouse.
Still stands today. What does this school look like?
Imagine a circle.
Imagine a red school.
Now combine the two.
Though the Circular Schoolhouse still stands, Dr. John Wilson does not.
Dr. John Wilson died in 1847 after 29 years of good standing in the community.
Just before he died, He summoned several of his friends and made a last request.
When I pass into the ground, I want to be buried with all my clothes on, even my neck scarf.
His friends agreed.
But as soon as Dr. Wilson passed, the undertaker removed all his clothes prior to washing and embalming the body.
Dr. Wilson's friends observed.
On Dr. Wilson's neck was a long, ugly scar, apparently from a sword or knife.
In the calf of one leg was what appeared to be an old bullet wound.
That leg was withered and shorter than the other.
A fact he'd covered up by inserting a thick wedge of cork into his shoe and refusing to limp.
Dr. Wilson often fell flat on his face at the town Contreras.
Dr. John Wilson was not Dr. John Wilson.
Dr. John Wilson was John Doherty.
John Doherty was not John Doherty.
Michael Martin was not Michael Martin.
John Doherty was Captain Thunderbolt.
Michael Martin was Lightfoot.
Captain Thunderbolt was not Captain Thunderbolt. Lightfoot was not Lightfoot.
Captain Thunderbolt.
And
Lightfoot
were
Captain Thunderbolt.
and
Lightfoot.
their
story is not to be believed. During the early 1800s, Captain Thunderbolt and Lightfoot were the two most feared highwaymen in Britain and
They
America.
never robbed women.
They stole from the rich.
They gave to the poor.
And each escaped death dozens of times.
And in Vermont, they taught school children in a circular schoolhouse beginning 1818.
Now, let's get started.